Happy New Year and welcome to my channel. My name is Anuska. Thank you so much for joining me today. So this is my first video for 2022. And I thought I'd talk today about voice quality because I think it's a really important topic for speakers to understand, particularly if you're listening back to recordings of your voice and you might hear things in your voice and you might be quite sure what you're listening to. So I'm going to talk today about 5 aspects of voice quality, which are what I'm really listening for in a new client's voice, so that I really know how I can help them move forward. Because everything starts with the functionality of the voice, the quality of the instrument. Only then, if the instrument is really functioning at its best, can we access the full creative potential of our voice. I often feel like a lot of public speaking training focuses on the icing on the cake and not the cake. And so my training is all about, let's make sure the cake is there first of all, and it's made as well as it possibly can be made, and then we can stick the icing on it. Now, just to preface this by saying, I'm not a speech therapist. I don't work in the clinical sphere with voices. So if anyone has a sort of serious voice disorder or have had vocal surgery or anything like that, I wouldn't work with those types of clients. But I do work with people who are professionals, generally speaking, who need their voice to be functioning in their business or career, and they just don't really understand how it works and they don't know how to access it. But there's nothing actually wrong with the instrument. The instrument is healthy, the instrument is working, but they've just never been taught how to access it. I think it's really helpful to, when we're thinking about the voice, because it's so abstract, to actually sort of think about it in something completely different. So when we think about a piano, you have the piano player and you have the piano. So you have the instrument and the player of that instrument. Now that is us as a speaker. We are both the instrument, the vocal instrument, which is really our whole body, but we could argue that it's the vocal tract and the vocal and the larynx and the voice box, but we're also the player of that instrument. We are the expression of that instrument, just like a piano player is the expression of that piano, which is why we can have the same piano and 10 different people can play it and it can sound completely different, but it's the same instrument. Now, with the piano, just keeping with this theme for a minute, because I think it's helpful, if I was to give you a piano where half the notes are missing, the pedals don't work, maybe it hasn't been tuned properly, you're never going to be able to get the most from that instrument and be as creative as possible, because you'd be trying to kind of play around the bits that aren't working. Versus if I gave you a complete piano, which is fully working, everything's tuned, it sounds beautiful, the world's your oyster then. You can do what you like in terms of expression. It's the same with us. It's the same with our voice. So we all have an instrument sort of inbuilt, and for most of us, we're never taught how to use it and how to access it. So this is what I do in my teaching. And I just wanted to share that because I think it's really important to understand that we have to make sure the instrument's functioning first before we start worrying about how to, be more expressive, for example, because it's always going to be limited by the instrument. So this scale is something that speech language therapists often use. It's used in the clinical sphere of voice. So when I work with a new client, I'm listening for these things I'm now about to share with you. It's not about the accent. And I think a lot of people mistakenly think voice training is about accents and trying to make you sound like someone else. For me, it's about optimizing, maximizing, and enhancing your voice. And sometimes that might be helping you more with articulation, for example, or maybe slowing down your speech so people can understand you. I'm never trying to change the core of your voice because I think it's so important to embrace who you are. So this scale was developed in 1981 in Japan by Hirano, and it covers 5 kind of areas of voice quality. And it's worth mentioning now that they do overlap, but there is usually, when I'm listening to someone, there's usually 1 or 2 that sort of dominate. But I just thought I'd mention that they don't work in isolation. Well, nothing works in isolation with the voice. They do overlap. So I think it's really useful to help to understand that. So there's these 5 areas that I'm going to talk about, and then we're grading them. And as I say, I don't do this formally because I'm not a clinician, but then we're grading it on maybe 0 to 4. So 0 being, there's nothing I can perceive in the voice in this category. 4, I can severely hear this in this voice. For most of the people that I work with, it would be on the milder, lower end of the spectrum, because otherwise they wouldn't be working with me. So, but these are things that, although I hear them in the voice, there are things that I can address with that person because it's not so severe. So the first one, the G, so the scale is called GRBAS. So the G stands for grade. And grade is essentially the level of hoarseness in the voice. So we could also think about that as raspiness or croakiness. So often, of course, when we're sick, we probably all experienced a hoarse, croaky or raspy voice when we've been sick. But then as we get better, that disappears. And that's normal. It's when it doesn't go. So even when you're healthy, you still have this kind of croakiness or raspiness or hoarseness to the voice. Now, this is actually quite common. I hear quite a lot of croakiness in people's voices, and it's just more about how they're using their voice versus there's actually something really wrong with their voice. So I can usually address that pretty quickly. But essentially, for me, it's normally the voice is kind of sitting to back in the throat. It's like, back here. It's very, very common. So it's something I work with all the time with clients. So that was G, that was grade. So then the R stands for rough, which is there's a roughness, there's a harshness in the voice. It could also be a lack of clarity can often help as well. If you're hearing a lack of clarity in your voice, there's just that kind of roughness. Again, this is something that I'm listening for in the voice when I'm listening to people speak. And often this is to do with the vocal folds or the vocal cords, that they're not fully, completely, cleanly adducting or coming together. And so that's something that I can address with people to help them learn how to really fully adduct those vocal cords or vocal folds. The next one is B, which stands for breathy, and that's where there's a lot of air. There's a very airy voice, a very breathy voice. Maybe there's a sort of a lot of whispering going on in the voice. And when we think about the voice, we're thinking about a balance of air and muscle, just to simplify it. And so obviously here, then there's too much air in the voice. So then I would be working with that person to just engage a little bit more muscle in the voice and maybe help them with their breath a little bit too. So they're not breathing so much. There's not so much air going through the voice. So that's quite common too, and can often be why people struggle with projecting if the voice is quite breathy and airy. So the next one is A, which stands for asthenic, which is essentially a kind of thinness or a weakness in the voice. And again, this could also contribute to difficulty with projecting. And again, there's many ways I can help people with this. You're probably starting to see, I mean, they don't work in isolation, these, they often overlap. So, you can maybe fall into a couple of categories here. So that's something that I absolutely hear quite frequently as well. And it's something that I can definitely help address in a voice. So S stands for strained. This is the last one. So that could be a lot of constriction or tension, excessive tension in the vocal tract. So the vocal tract is not as open as it could be, and therefore the voice is being kind of blocked and hindered. So that they are the 5 again. So G is essentially grade, which is hoarseness, raspiness, croakiness. R stands for rough, which is that there's a lack of clarity, there's a roughness in the voice. B stands for breathy or airy, too much air, too much breath in the voice. A stands for asthenic, which is there's a thinness, there's a weakness in the voice. And S stands for strained, there's an excessive kind of constriction or tension in the voice. Now, just remembering that this is a scale, and at the extreme end, it could be pointing to a sort of quite severe voice disorder, or there's something else going on. So the people that I work with are at the other end of the spectrum, where we can do things to really make a drastic difference to the quality of the voice and allow it to kind of freely and openly express, which is really the whole point of all my work and why I do what I do and help people. So I hope that that's really helped, and it's given you a little bit more awareness and maybe understanding of what you might be hearing when you listen to your voice. And just know that there's always things that can be done. And, you know, and it's more about habitual patterns and conditioning with the voice in most cases. So therefore we can do something about it. So if you're interested in learning more about private coaching, please do get in contact below. You can book a free 20-minute voice consult, and I can certainly kind of listen to your voice and sort of tell you what I'm hearing. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, please do post them below. If you like this video, you found it useful, please do like, share, and subscribe. That would be brilliant. But thank you so much. Until next time, we'll see you on my next video.